This is SQL. And when you are learning SQL, you are going to learn how to read and write something like this. This is an actual SQL. We want to come back and look at what this means and why we need it as software testers. SQL is the language of databases. And a lot of software uses databases to store their data. So when we are testing software, we need to test the database. We need to test the interaction between our software and the database. That's why we need to know SQL. I put SQL at step 4 of your 8-step learning to become a QA automation engineer, or an SDET. The 8 steps are actually more for SDET than for QA automation engineer. You are going to be a software engineer in test. And I put it at step 4, but you can take it at any step because there is no prerequisite. But this is the most logical step that I think is the right thing. Step 1 was to learn a programming language, start learning with Python. Step 2 was to learn the basics of QA so you can understand terminology and things like that. Step 3 was to learn the front-end automation, which is Selenium for the most part. And step 4 is to learn SQL, which is the language of the database. Now, it helps to have context. Why do we need SQL as software testers or as automation engineers? It's because, like I said before, software uses the database to store the data. And we want to make sure software is working correctly, is doing what it's supposed to do. So we need to validate the database. We need to make sure whenever the software is storing data in the database, it is actually happening the correct way. We're going to look at real examples coming up just in a few minutes, maybe less. All right, so number 2, the tester's job is to check the information being saved correctly. It's pretty much what I explained. And SQL actually stands for Structured Query Language. It's a language to query databases. So we use it to talk to the database just like the software uses it to talk to the database. I briefly mentioned that you can take it at any point, and I want to elaborate more on that. Even though I put it at a step 4, let's say you are already a manual tester and you're trying to learn to become an automation engineer, an automation tester. In that case, you could even start with SQL because even manual testers need SQL. So by learning SQL, even as a manual tester, you're just going to be like a step ahead a little bit, right? So you can learn at any point. There is no prerequisite. You don't need to know a programming language to learn SQL. For example, if you want to learn Selenium with front-end testing, you need a language to learn Selenium. If you want to learn API testing, which is going to be next, you need a language to do API testing. But to do SQL, you can just start at any time. Even though this, I feel like step 4 is the most logical one. But if you feel like if you're anxious and you just excited to learn about the database, go ahead and start with SQL. You are free to do so. But I do recommend it to learn before API testing, because when you're doing an API testing, you make an API call and you go verify the database. So we use a database, you use SQL quite often in API testing. So I do recommend you do SQL prior to API testing. All right, before we jump into the actual examples, where to learn, one of the first places you should start definitely is my free course. I'm not just trying to just promote that course. Well, I am, but at the same time, it really is good. Out of the 14 hours or so course right now, about 5 hours of that is SQL. I'm a very technical guy, so I put a lot of effort into the technical parts of that. And the major parts are SQL and API. So definitely start there. That will give you the foundation. It will help you set up databases, teach you how to read data, how to write data, everything you need. Then you can take a much bigger course to get more into it. But really, that's all you need. So I highly do recommend you start there. The link will be in the description. It's a totally free course. It's an awesome software testing fundamental course. I put a lot of effort into that. Definitely check that out. But also, of course, I always do recommend Udemy for this kind of things, like a standalone, simple side project type of things. So if you just want to take an SQL course, you can do it in Udemy. As testers, we don't need a whole lot of SQL. We don't need a really complicated logic. We don't need to be like SQL experts. We just need the basics. So don't invest way too much time on SQL. I want you to invest your time on Python, right? The more Python you know, the better, even interviews and everything. But SQL, you just need the basics. So I don't want you to go and spend like a week or 2 weeks on SQL. Just a few days is probably enough. Maybe a week is decent, actually, depending on how many hours a day you're doing it. But yeah, make sure you do that. You don't overspend on that. So what are the use cases of an SQL? When we look at this example, what this is doing is, this is the database. This is the database, so I don't want to get into too much into the technicals, but this is the database for our e-commerce site. So we have this website. This is an e-commerce website. This website stores its data in the database. All the products you see here, right? We see a bunch of products here. The information for these products is stored in the database. So one of the use cases is you need data to be able to test with, right? That's like, normally that's the reverse of a use case. Let's start with that one. That's a little bit more difficult. You want to test something and you need data for that. For example, you want to test searching for something, right? Making sure search works. Easily you can get an album, you can get a beanie and just search, you know they exist. But in automation, you don't get to see it like this, so you have to prepare. So in your automation, in your code, you're going to go and connect to the database and read information from the database. I'll also show you an example of a Python code that's using SQL. It's two languages coming together. You have Python, you have SQL. You have the Python code running all your automation, but the only way the Python code can talk to the database is using the database language, which is SQL. So it's going to use SQL and talk to the database. So Python language itself is going to have SQL embedded inside to be able to talk to the database. So that's how those two languages work together. So we'll get back to that, but back to the search example. Now I'll go to the database and I'll run a query like this. Select means read. That's really what select means. Select, these are the columns. So if you look at databases, I'll show you what a database looks like. It is just like an Excel, right? If you ever work with Excel or sheets or something like that, it is just a bunch of tables. And in the tables, there is columns and there's rows. That's what a structured database is. What we're looking at here is MySQL. There's different kind of databases. There's Postgres, MongoDB. There's different types of databases. MySQL is the most popular database out there, and it's a relational database. It's a structured database, and the structure looks like this. So our job is reading information from here. It's basically you reading information from like an Excel document, but with steroids, like super powerful speed and filtering. So in this table could have millions of rows. This one is pretty small, but this is what it looks like. So here we're reading it from two different tables, right? I don't want to get into that right now. We are saying join this table in that table and give me a product that has a price, right? I want to make sure I'm getting a product that has a price. I'm going to run the query. I get all those right here. So I'm just going to take one of the jobs. Let's say this came out really weird, but let's just try it out. We're going to copy this name here. So I'm going to do copy field uncoded. Then we're going to go to the website and we are going to search. I don't even know if that's going to show up. It is show up, logo collection, right? So technically that's really what you need it for. That's what you use it for. Find data and apply it. The other one, the most straightforward use case, is when you actually create something. For example, I create a user. So I go to my account and I register a brand new user. I'm going to say test user. Let's put 100 because test user 1 probably exists. At supersqa.com. We're going to do some dummy password and it's going to be okay. There you go. Just put in a weird password, hit register. Let me copy this, test user 100. Now I registered. So the front end said, hey, everything is good. You just created a new user. It works. You can just go and say pass, right? The front end works. User registration works. As a tester, you are testing if registration is working, and it worked. You can say that, but you want to take it a step further. And did it really, right? Even though the front end said, yeah, it worked, but how about the backend? Did this user get stored correctly in the backend? So now you have two options. One, you can go directly to the database and check. Two, you can make an API call that says, hey, give me a user and check. So we haven't talked about API, so we're going to deal with a database. And there's use cases where you want to prefer one versus the other. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to go right back to the database. So this tool that I'm using is called MySQL Workbench. You're going to learn how to use this when you're learning SQL. It's one of the most popular tools to read databases. So here, I'm going to come here and I'm going to run a query. And I need to know where users are created in the database, right? Like every application has its own structure, and normally you would have a documentation on how that is created. Here, this is a WordPress site, and the users are created in this WP users table. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say select star from demo store.wp users. So if I say select star, I'm saying give me all the columns, and I'm not doing any kind of filtering. I'm just saying give me everything in that table. The tool itself will limit it to 5,000 rows. And in this case, we have 396 rows. You can see it right down here. Now I want to make sure the user that I just created is in here, right? So I can say where when I want to add a filter. To be consistent, I'm just going to use lowercase. It's not case sensitive. Where we see there is a column called user email. So I'm going to say where user email is equal to that user I just created, and I'm going to say run. I'm going to execute that. I should see one row, and there we are. So what did I do right now? I went in the website, I created a user, the UI, the user interface. When I say UI, it's a user interface, a graphical user interface said everything is good, but I want to go to the database and make sure everything really is good. So I came to the database and I ran SQL. This is SQL right here. The one we saw here is a little bit bigger, a little longer, and this one is a lot smaller, but it does serve a purpose. So we run the query, we got a row, and we say, hey, this user is actually in the database, test pass. So it's one more validation. All right. So one last example, bringing this back to automation. What we did right now was manual testing, and then you're just going to simulate all of that in code to go to an automation testing. So to show you how a Python and SQL work together, I have a Python script. I call it product verifier. It's basically a Selenium script that will find the product and go and search it. But the point I want to make is we have a function. So Python knows how to connect to the database. It uses the database host, user password. You need information like that to connect. Then we see something familiar. We see SQL. SQL itself is structured query language. You have a language inside of our Python code. What we're looking at here is Python. At this point, at the stage 4, you know Python. So within Python, the Python code is executing SQL. It's going to make a connection to the database, execute a query, get the result, and use that result in somewhere else. Once it gets the result, here we have Selenium script that just opens a browser and goes to the browser and does a search. Okay, so I wanted to just tie the loop, just finish it off by showing you the integration between code and SQL, because this is automation. We're trying to learn automation, and we're trying to see why we need SQL for automation. All right, so I hope that gives you a clear picture of your next step and why we need SQL, what the use case is in SQL. You can search more in my channel to see SQL and QA, how they work together. And it is actually fun and it is simple. It's not complicated, so just get it done. If you want to get this, obviously the links are in the description. Go ahead and download this guide if you haven't done so already. I have a PDF for you, and I also have a page that you can just go check out, download that. If you want to work with me, if you want me to hold your hand and guide you to become QA automation engineer or SDET, work with me. I have a one-on-one coaching that we can work together and just figure out a whole plan. I also have a membership and courses that you can just go on your own speed if you want to. But in any case, if you want to get a great career and just upgrade, I'm the guy. Go ahead and check out what I have to offer, and I will see you on the next one. Just check out one of those videos. Probably you should check out the next thing, which is step 5, API testing.